The first victim was found at dawn, her body abandoned in an alley, like discarded trash. Detective Claire Simmons stood over the lifeless form of a young woman, her pale face barely recognizable beneath a layer of dirt and blood. The alley reeked of death and despair, but Claire had smelled worse. She crouched down, eyes tracing the jagged wounds that slashed across the woman's body, brutal and deliberate. "Same as the others?" asked Officer Ryan, standing a few feet away, nervously tapping his notebook against his leg. Claire nodded, her gloved fingers hovering over the grotesque cuts. "It's the same signature, the same precision. Our killer's getting bolder." 5 women had been murdered in the last 2 months, each one more brutal than the last. The media called him the Carver for his violent mutilations. Claire had spent sleepless nights poring over evidence, chasing shadows, trying to get ahead of him, but it always felt like he was one step ahead. This murder was no different. There was no struggle, no sign of forced entry. He was calm, calculating. He always left behind a calling card, a blood-stained piece of paper with a single word written on it. Claire watched as the forensics team gently pulled the note from the victim's cold hand. One word, her. Claire sat in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the wall covered in case files, photographs, and maps. Every victim had a story, and every story led to nothing but dead ends. She took a deep breath and opened the latest case file. The Carver's killings followed a pattern, but Claire had a gnawing feeling there was something she was missing. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number. "You're looking in the wrong place." Her blood ran cold. She stood up, scanning the room, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Who could be sending this? Was it a taunt, or was it something more? Her instincts told her not to ignore it. The message was followed by another. "You don't know about him." Claire's mind raced. Him? Was there a second killer involved? Was the Carver not acting alone? She tried to trace the number, but it led to nothing. A burner phone, no doubt. But the seed of doubt had already been planted in her mind. The next body was found 2 days later, dumped in a park, mutilated just like the others. But this time, there was something different, a second note. It wasn't the typical single-word message. Instead, the paper had 2 words scrawled across it in crimson ink. "Find him." Claire's heart sank as she realized the horrifying truth. There wasn't just one killer. There were 2. And they were playing a twisted game, against each other, and now against her. The second killer had a different style, less calculated, more impulsive. The cuts were sloppy, the violence raw and uncontrolled. Claire could almost feel the competition between them, as if each murder was a statement, a challenge. Late that night, Claire found herself alone in the precinct, reviewing security footage from the park where the latest body had been found. As she fast-forwarded through hours of grainy footage, something caught her eye, a figure, lingering in the shadows, just at the edge of the camera's frame. She rewound the tape and zoomed in. The figure was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the shadows. But there was something unsettling about the way he moved, almost like he knew the camera was watching him. She replayed the footage over and over, her mind spinning. Was this one of the killers? Or just someone who knew more than they were letting on? Her phone buzzed again. Another message, "You're close." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Was someone watching her right now? She glanced out the window of the precinct, half expecting to see someone lurking in the darkness, but the streets were empty. She knew she had to be careful. The killers were toying with her, drawing her deeper into their twisted game. And now, she was part of it. The breakthrough came the following week. Claire had been running herself ragged, barely sleeping, piecing together fragments of evidence. One of the forensic reports revealed something new, a trace of DNA that didn't belong to any of the victims. It was from a man. She cross-referenced the DNA with the national database, and there it was, an exact match. A man named David Rourke, a convicted felon with a history of violent assaults. He had been released from prison a year ago and had disappeared off the grid shortly after. Claire felt a surge of adrenaline. Could David Rourke be one of the killers? And if so, who was the second? She found Rourke holed up in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Armed with a warrant, Claire and a team of officers surrounded the building. As they burst through the door, they found Rourke sitting calmly at the edge of the bed, a twisted smile on his face. "You've been looking for me," he said softly, his eyes gleaming with malice. "But you don't understand. This isn't my game. It's his." "Who?" Claire demanded, her gun trained on him. Rourke chuckled, his voice low and gravelly. "You're not ready for him. He's been watching you for a long time." Before Claire could react, Rourke lunged at her, a knife flashing in his hand. The officers moved quickly, tackling him to the ground, but not before he whispered one last chilling message into Claire's ear. "He's already inside." The words haunted Claire long after Rourke was locked away. Who was this mysterious he that Rourke had spoken of? Was it the second killer, or someone else entirely? The messages on her phone had stopped, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the game wasn't over. Late at night, when the city was quiet, she would hear it, the faintest whisper in the dark. "You're next."